Hello and welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're really getting into something fundamental to, well, how we experience life, the nature of emotional trauma. For this exploration, we've gathered insights from various sources, including a really insightful academic article that breaks down what trauma is, how it affects us, and importantly, the pathways to healing. Our mission today, to move beyond the common, sometimes superficial understanding of trauma, we want to grasp its roots, its profound impact, and how healing can happen, all explained clearly, hopefully engagingly, with those aha moments. And joining me, as always, is our expert guide through this complex terrain.
It's great to be here. This is such a critical topic, definitely worth unpacking carefully.
Fantastic. So I guess the big question to start with is, based on our sources, what is trauma, really? Because the everyday idea can feel a bit incomplete.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if we go back to the word itself, trauma comes from Greek, meaning wound. And that's literally what it is. There's a definition from Dr. Gabor Maté in our material that I think really hits the nail on the head. He says, trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you.
Wow. Okay, that really shifts the focus, doesn't it? It's not just the external event.
Exactly. It puts the emphasis on the internal response, the wound itself. And I think the documentary The Wisdom of Trauma described it powerfully too, calling trauma the invisible force that shapes our lives, the root of our deepest wounds.
Like an unseen current influencing everything.
Pretty much. And a crucial point the sources make is that it's not just the objective severity of an event that makes it traumatic. It's very much about the individual's subjective experience and the resources they have available at the time.
So context matters a lot.
Immensely. Think about it. Something a resourceful adult might find difficult but manageable could be deeply traumatic for a child who lacks that understanding or coping capacity.
Right. Okay. So let's break that down a bit more, maybe from the brain's perspective. How does trauma actually affect us neurobiologically?
Okay, yeah. The neurobiology is fascinating and sobering. When we face a perceived threat, our brain kicks into survival mode, the classic fight, flight, or freeze response. This involves the limbic system, especially the amygdala, that's like our internal smoke detector, and the brainstem. Normally, the system calms down once the danger passes.
But with trauma, it doesn't.
Well, the issue is that with traumatic experiences, this alert system can become chronically sensitized. It's like the dial gets stuck on high alert, leading to persistent hypervigilance.
That explains that feeling of always being on edge, scanning for danger, that people sometimes describe.
Precisely. It's exhausting. And trauma also impacts the hippocampus, which is crucial for consolidating memories and tagging them with context like time and place. This is why traumatic memories often feel fragmented, like disjointed snapshots, and can intrude into the present as flashbacks, feeling like they're happening right now.
Without that past label attached.
Exactly. Then there's the prefrontal cortex, our executive function hub responsible for emotional regulation, planning, rational thought. Trauma can impair its functioning, making it harder to manage intense emotions or think clearly about the experience.
Okay. And you mentioned hormones, too.
Right. The HPA axis, that's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, our central stress response system. Chronic trauma can dysregulate it, leading to abnormal cortisol levels, either consistently high or sometimes even too low. And this contributes to a whole host of issues: fatigue, immune system problems, sleep disturbances. It really ripples outwards.
It really does sound like a whole system impact. And I understand there isn't just one type of trauma.
No, definitely not. The sources distinguish several key types. First, there's what's often called single-event trauma or simple trauma. This results from a specific time-limited incident. Think a serious car accident, a natural disaster like an earthquake or fire, a one-off assault, receiving a life-threatening diagnosis, or the sudden death of a loved one.
Okay, distinct events.
Yes. While incredibly impactful, these can sometimes be easier to process because they have a clear beginning and end, and often occurred against a backdrop of prior safety.
Makes sense. Then there's complex trauma or developmental trauma. How does that differ?
This is a big one. Complex trauma arises from repeated or prolonged adverse experiences, especially during childhood, and critically, often within interpersonal relationships with caregivers, family members.
So it's ongoing and relational.
Exactly. We're talking about things like chronic neglect, ongoing abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual happening during crucial developmental stages when the brain is highly malleable. Key features are often a lack of external recognition or validation, and it can include an accumulation of what might seem like smaller incidents or microtraumas.
And the impact is deeper because it happens during development.
Profoundly so. It shapes identity formation, emotional regulation skills, relational patterns, fundamentally affects how someone sees themselves and the world. Dr. Maté has that poignant quote about how even consistently failing to meet an infant's need for attunement and comfort can be wounding.
That's quite sobering.
Yeah.
What are some concrete examples here?
Well, sustained emotional abuse or invalidation, chronic physical or sexual abuse, severe neglect, emotional or physical, long-term exposure to domestic violence, highly inconsistent or frightening parenting, prolonged separation from primary caregivers, or persistent severe bullying.
Okay. Then we have intergenerational or historical trauma. This feels vast.
It is. This refers to trauma that gets passed down through generations within families or entire communities, even if later generations didn't directly experience the original traumatic events. There's growing research in epigenetics suggesting traumatic experiences can actually influence gene expression in ways that affect descendants.
Wow. How does that show up?
It can manifest in various ways. Recurring dysfunctional family patterns, familial predispositions to certain physical or mental illnesses, unconsciously transmitted limiting beliefs, difficulties forming secure attachments, or heightened sensitivity to triggers related to the original collective trauma.
And lastly, collective and societal trauma.
Right. This affects entire groups of people simultaneously. Think about the impact of wars, genocide, systemic oppression and discrimination, colonization, large-scale natural disasters, or pandemics. Collective trauma shapes shared narratives of suffering, cultural identity, social policies, and institutions, sometimes for many generations.
It's really staggering the different forms and levels this takes. Now, moving on to the impact. The source of stress, it goes far beyond just the psychological.
Absolutely. As Dr. Marianne Trent mentioned in one source, trauma can manifest physically, things like migraines, IBS, back problems. We touched on the brain changes, the sensitized limbic system and amygdala, the hippocampus struggling with memory context, the prefrontal cortex having trouble regulating. The brain essentially stays wired for threat, even when the danger's past.
That state of high alert we talked about.
Exactly. The nervous system gets recalibrated, you could say, and this constant state of activation, or sometimes shutdown, has knock-on effects throughout the body.
So how does that play out in different body systems?
Well, take the immune system. Chronic stress associated with trauma can suppress immune function, making individuals more susceptible to infections, but also potentially contributing to autoimmune diseases, things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, then the cardiovascular system. There's a well-established link between trauma and increased risk of hypertension, heart disease, stroke. The constant flood of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol can damage blood vessels and promote inflammation.
And the digestive system. You mentioned IBS?
Yes, the gut-brain axis is incredibly sensitive to stress. Irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, and other digestive disorders are highly prevalent in people with trauma histories. The endocrine system gets disrupted too, hormonal imbalances affecting metabolism, thyroid function, fertility, sleep patterns. This can contribute to conditions like diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome.
It seems like almost every system is touched.
It often is. Even the musculoskeletal system, chronic muscle tension, often held in patterns related to protective responses during the trauma, can lead to chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia. Gabor Maté, in The Myth of Normality and When the Body Says No, really emphasizes this inseparable link between emotional well-being, social connection, and physical health. He argues trauma is often an overlooked root cause of many chronic illnesses conventionally treated purely biomedically.
So trauma isn't just in the head, it's deeply embodied.
Precisely. It's a whole being experience.
And what about the more observable emotional and behavioral impacts?
Emotionally, trauma can intensify or distort feelings. Anger or rage might become chronic, initially a protective response that gets stuck. Anxiety, fear, even terror can become pervasive, triggered by reminders of the trauma. Deep sadness or hopelessness can set in, potentially leading to depression.
You mentioned shame earlier, too.
Yes, shame is a big one. It's different from guilt, which is about behavior. Shame attacks one's sense of self-worth, leading to toxic shame, isolation. And sometimes people develop emotional numbness or detachment as a coping mechanism, a way to survive overwhelming feelings, but it also cuts them off from joy and connection.
And how does this translate into behavior?
We often see avoidance, steering clear of people, places, or activities that trigger memories or feelings associated with the trauma. This restricts life, but reinforces the fear. Hypervigilance, that constant scanning for threat. Sometimes, paradoxically, risk-taking behaviors emerge, seeking intense sensations, perhaps, to feel something other than numbness or to regain a sense of control.
Addiction comes up a lot in relation to trauma, too.
Yes, very strongly. Addiction is often viewed, particularly by Maté, as an attempt to self-medicate unbearable emotional pain stemming from unresolved trauma. Dysfunctional relationship patterns are also common, repeating unhealthy dynamics, difficulty with boundaries, intense fear of abandonment or engulfment. And sadly, sometimes self-harm occurs as a way to cope with overwhelming pain or numbness.
And clinically, what are some red flags or diagnostic indicators?
Things like persistent insomnia or recurrent nightmares related to the event, increased irritability or angry outbursts, intrusive memories or flashbacks vividly re-experiencing aspects of the trauma, difficulty concentrating, pervasive feelings of guilt or shame, social withdrawal or isolation, dissociation, feeling detached from oneself or reality, and somatization, physical symptoms without a clear medical cause.
You've mentioned Dr. Gabor Maté quite a bit. His perspective seems really central to a deeper understanding here.
It really is. Dr. Maté brings such a compassionate and integrated lens to trauma. His own family history, touched by the Holocaust and early loss, deeply informs his work. His experiences in palliative care and working extensively with addiction in Vancouver revealed these powerful connections between early experiences, trauma, addiction, and physical illness.
And his book, The Myth of Normality. What's the core idea there?
He argues quite compellingly with his son Daniel that many aspects of modern Western society are inherently traumatizing or create conditions ripe for trauma. Things like our disconnection from nature, extreme individualism, pervasive materialism, the frantic pace of life, the breakdown of community and extended family support, disconnection from our own bodies, and the tendency to medicalize normal human distress.
It challenges the very idea of what normal is in our culture.
Exactly. He critiques Western medicine for often viewing mind and body as separate, missing these deeper connections.
And his view on addiction as linked to trauma.
He defines addiction very broadly. Any behavior or substance use that provides short-term relief from pain but leads to negative long-term consequences. Critically, he sees addiction not as a primary disease or a moral failing, but as a response, often a desperate attempt to soothe the profound emotional pain of unresolved trauma. Addictions offer temporary escape, a fleeting sense of control, a substitute for connection, or a way to regulate overwhelming emotions. His famous question isn't why the addiction, but why the pain?
That's a profoundly different and more humane question to ask. What about the wisdom of trauma? What's the core message there?
The wisdom of trauma champions the idea of a trauma-informed society, one that seeks to understand the origins of problematic behaviors and illnesses rather than just judging or punishing them. Maté emphasizes that seemingly abnormal behaviors are often normal adaptive responses to abnormal circumstances. His quote, "There are no abnormal people, only normal responses to abnormal experiences," captures this. The wisdom, he suggests, lies in recognizing that symptoms carry meaning, that the body holds the score, that connection is vital for healing, and that self-compassion is transformative. He reframes trauma not just as damage, but as a potential catalyst for growth.
And he connects this to parenting too, right? Interrupting cycles.
Yes, very much so. He highlights how easily trauma patterns are passed down through parenting, often unconsciously. He advocates for conscious parenting focused on emotional attunement, presence, unconditional acceptance, parental authenticity and self-regulation, and setting healthy boundaries. It's not about perfection, he stresses, but about awareness, learning, and crucially, repair when ruptures happen.
We've talked a lot about the psychological and emotional side, but the source is really stress, the physical, the body's role.
Absolutely. Thinkers like Bessel van der Kolk with The Body Keeps the Score and Peter Levine, the developer of somatic experiencing, have been pioneers here. They explain how trauma gets trapped in the body, especially when survival responses, fight or flight, are thwarted, leading to a freeze or tonic immobility state. This undischarged survival energy gets stored in the nervous system and tissues.
And that manifests physically.
Yes, as chronic muscle tension, often in specific defensive patterns, heightened nervous system sensitivity, physiological dysregulation. We might see protective postures, restricted breathing, difficulty feeling sensation in parts of the body, digestive issues, immune problems, chronic fatigue, sleep disturbances. The body is literally holding the trauma.
I think I saw the term window of tolerance mentioned in this context.
Yes, that's a concept from Dr. Dan Siegel. It describes the optimal zone of nervous system arousal where we can function effectively and process information. Trauma tends to narrow this window. So someone might easily get tipped into hyperarousal feeling anxious, overwhelmed, reactive, or hyperarousal feeling numb, shut down, disconnected by relatively small stressors.
And somatic therapies aim to widen that window.
Exactly. That's a key goal. Approaches like somatic experiencing, ASI, sensorimotor psychotherapy, trauma-informed yoga, TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, Hakomi, Feldenkrais, they all work directly with the body's experience. Common principles include building body awareness, interoception, tracking sensations, working within the window of tolerance, gently facilitating the discharge of trapped energy, restoring a sense of bodily safety, enhancing nervous system self-regulation, and integrating sensory, emotional, and cognitive processing. They recognize that healing trauma requires engaging the body.
It's good to know there are body-focused approaches.
Yeah.
And fortunately, there are also well-established therapies with strong evidence for treating trauma more broadly.
Yes, definitely. One of the leading evidence-based treatments is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's recognized by major organizations like the WHO and APA. The theory is that traumatic memories are stored maladaptively, and the bilateral stimulation used in EMDR, like eye movements, tapping, or sounds, helps the brain process and integrate these memories in a healthier way.
How does it work, roughly?
It's an 8-phase protocol that involves taking a history, preparing the client, identifying the target memory and associated negative beliefs, emotions, and sensations, then applying the bilateral stimulation while holding the memory in mind, desensitization, installing a more positive belief, scanning the body for residual tension, ensuring closure, and reevaluating later. It aims to take the intense emotional charge off the memory.
So the memory becomes just a memory, not something that hijacks you.
That's the goal, transforming it from a vivid, disturbing intrusion into a regular memory that belongs in the past.
What other effective therapies are highlighted?
Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TFCBT, has a lot of empirical support. It typically involves psychoeducation, coping skills training, gradual exposure to trauma memories, imaginal, in vivo, or written, and cognitive restructuring, identifying and challenging unhelpful thoughts related to the trauma. There are specialized forms like cognitive processing therapy, CPT, and narrative exposure therapy, NET.
Okay.
We mentioned sensorimotor psychotherapy earlier, integrating somatic work with attachment theory and neuroscience. It's particularly helpful for dissociation. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, while originally for borderline personality disorder, is very effective for complex trauma survivors struggling with emotional dysregulation and self-destructive behaviors. It teaches skills in mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness.
Skills-based, then.
Very much so. Attachment-based therapies are crucial when trauma stems from early relational wounds. They focus on understanding attachment patterns, repairing relational templates, and building internal security. Compassion-focused therapy, CFT, is valuable for addressing the deep shame and self-criticism common after trauma, cultivating self-compassion as a resource. And acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, helps individuals accept difficult thoughts and feelings without struggle, clarifying personal values and committing to actions aligned with those values, even in the presence of pain.
So quite a range of tools available.
A very rich toolkit. And often, therapists integrate approaches, tailoring treatment to the individual. Generally, effective trauma therapy involves phases: establishing safety and stabilization first, then processing the traumatic memories, and finally, integration and moving forward.
That's encouraging. The sources also really emphasize the need for a broader societal shift towards becoming trauma-informed.
Absolutely. A trauma-informed society operates on key principles: widespread recognition of trauma's prevalence and impact, fostering self-awareness and relational awareness of how trauma affects interactions, cultivating active compassion, and prioritizing psychological and physical safety in all systems.
What would that look like in practice? In, say, schools or healthcare?
Well, in education, it means training staff, implementing restorative practices instead of just punitive ones, teaching social-emotional skills, creating safe environments, and collaborating with families. In healthcare, it means routinely screening for adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, understanding the trauma-illness link, providing person-centered care, avoiding re-traumatization during procedures, and integrating mental and physical health services.
And justice and social services.
In the justice system, understanding the traumatic roots of much criminal behavior, using restorative justice approaches where appropriate, providing therapeutic interventions, avoiding re-traumatizing practices, and focusing on rehabilitation. For social services, training staff, minimizing re-traumatization and service delivery, providing holistic support, recognizing intersectionality, and using strengths-based approaches. It also requires public policies that support families, increase access to mental health care, focus on early prevention, address social determinants of health, and reduce community violence.
It's really about a fundamental shift in perspective from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
Exactly, a shift towards understanding and compassion.
And despite the difficulty, the sources also talk about resilience and even growth after trauma.
Yes, thankfully. Resilience isn't about not being affected, it's the capacity to adapt and recover from adversity. Factors fostering it include strong social connections, emotional regulation skills, finding a meaning in the experience, a sense of self-efficacy, adaptive beliefs, flexibility, and self-care. And then there's post-traumatic growth, PTG. This refers to the positive psychological changes that some people experience following a struggle with highly challenging life circumstances.
What kind of positive changes?
Common areas include a greater appreciation for life, deeper and more meaningful relationships, recognizing new possibilities for oneself, increased personal strength, and spiritual or existential growth. It's crucial to note that growth often coexists with ongoing pain or struggle. It's not about erasing the trauma, but about transforming the experience into something meaningful, into wisdom.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the core takeaway message about the nature of trauma from these sources?
I think the fundamental message is that trauma is far more than just the event. It's the internal wound, as Maté puts it, and it requires attention and healing. It's a biopsychosocial phenomenon. Mind, body, and social context are inseparable. While its impact can be profound and pervasive, there are effective therapeutic pathways available, drawing on diverse approaches. And ultimately, fostering a trauma-informed society holds immense potential for creating safer, more compassionate communities where healing is possible.
The wisdom of trauma perhaps lies in that potential for learning, connection, and transformation.
Beautifully put, learning through awareness, compassion, and community.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and navigating this complex topic with such clarity. And to you, our listeners, we hope this deep dive has offered a richer understanding of trauma's depth and its impact, both personally and collectively. We've touched on key ideas from our sources, but there's always more to explore. We encourage you to reflect on how this information resonates with your own experiences or your understanding of others. And as a final thought to carry with you, how might we apply this understanding of trauma in our everyday lives and our interactions to foster greater healing and connection for everyone? Thanks for joining us.